So, all right, so I'm going to turn it over to John and enjoy the CLE. Thank you, folks.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. And thank you guys for being here on Halloween of all evenings. I thought we'd start off just a little bit about those who are in the room so I can sort of know your background, experience, and maybe objectives for being here so that I can teach in a way that's most tailored to your interests and needs. A little bit about me: went to Villanova Law School, graduated, went to Ecuador where I pursued a Fulbright Fellowship researching human trafficking, came back, worked for a local nonprofit law firm here in Philadelphia, working with victims of human trafficking, then went to work as a prosecutor in Chester County, and now I work at a private law firm in Westchester. So I have focused on human trafficking for going on 8 or 9 years now. It's been near and dear to my heart. The ways that we can better identify individuals who have been victims of trafficking, and I want you to leave here today with a better understanding of what that means and what, if anything, you as attorneys can do on behalf of victims of trafficking. So maybe just well, I hope you each leave here today with a better sense of what you could do to help prevent the problem of human trafficking. That could look like taking some legal steps that I think are open to any sort of civil practitioners. That could look like just better identifying those who have been victims of human trafficking. And so first I wanted to tell the story of Miriam. And this begins in Egypt with a young girl who is invited to go to the United States and work providing sort of domestic services for a family. It sounds like a good idea to her. She's able to get in touch with an agency in the United States that brings her over, flies her over to New York, where she meets up with a wealthy family living in a suburb of New York City. And that family brings her home from the airport. They bring her to their house, and they get her set up in her own space. Now, her own space is in the laundry room, and she's told the various chores that she's supposed to do around the house. She's not enrolled in school, and the family quickly begins piling on chore after chore after chore, such that all she has time for every day is doing work for the family, whether it's cleaning, cooking 3 meals a day, taking care of the children, and ironing, all their laundry. She is only working, not going to school, and she only speaks Arabic, right? She's from Egypt, so nothing about English is familiar to her. Nothing about our government structure is familiar to her. And one day she wants to leave the home, and the parents tell her, not without our supervision, you're not going anywhere. And it quickly becomes clear to her that her role is to stay in the home and not to leave. That this couple has brought her over to work for them on their terms, and that she's not permitted to eat at the family table with them. She's not to wash her clothes in the same washing machine as the family's clothes for fear of making the family dirty. She's physically and sexually abused over time by the husband and wife in the household. She lives like this for several years. She did live like this for several years in a suburban neighborhood outside New York City. And it wasn't until a neighbor one evening saw her washing dishes at like 2 in the morning, and they thought, gee, isn't that strange? Why is this young girl washing dishes at 2 a.m.? That the neighbor shared that information with police, and they did an investigation and determined that this young woman had in fact been living there on the terms of the mother and father going back a couple years since she had first come from Egypt. And so my question for you guys is, when did this girl, Miriam was her name, when did her situation become one involving trafficking? At what moment in time is it legally correct to say she was trafficked? Yeah?
Would it be when, I guess, they knew their intent was wrong and they asked their parents to send her over? Or that she actually traveled and they had the intent to keep her?
No, she wasn't trafficked at the point when she had an intent to come over and work in domestic service, nor was she trafficked at the moment when she got on a plane and came to the United States. Other ideas? Yeah?
Probably when she was told she couldn't leave.
Precisely. This was a person doing work, told, you may not leave because the consequences will be severe. And so she felt like she had no other option. She felt like she had to stay. She didn't have to cross an international border. It wouldn't really have made much of a difference if she had been a US citizen or from Egypt. It just so happens that she didn't know the language, so it was that much more difficult to get in touch with authorities. The couple actually told her that if she did call the police, that they would be like the police in Egypt. They would be corrupt and they wouldn't believe her. And so, yeah, that made it more difficult, but you could imagine if this happened to a disabled person in the United States, if this happened to a young girl who had maybe run away from her family in the United States. So long as that couple is holding something over that person and forcing that person to continue working, preventing them from leaving, that's the moment that the trafficking or enslavement begins. So a lot of advocates in the human trafficking circles describe this as modern day slavery. And some of the best estimates suggest that there's more slaves globally at the moment than existed at the time of the Atlantic slave trade several hundred years ago. And so this is a problem happening in our communities, in suburban neighborhoods, in city centers, and I hope that over the course of this presentation, you can become familiar with benefits available to victims of human trafficking. You can know the difference between the federal definition and the state definition. You can understand what conduct is prohibited with respect to documents. You can see some circumstances that are common when it comes to human trafficking. And ultimately, you can start to formulate your own questions and say, okay, if I'm going to identify a victim of human trafficking, here's some of the questions that I need to ask. And ultimately, at the end, I'll give you all the questions I think could be worth asking. And I hope that in time you would add your own to them. So we only know what to look for, I would suggest, by deeply understanding the conduct prohibited. So, sir, if you were asked to screen applicants that were applying to become astronauts, what information would you need to know in order to effectively screen those applicants?
I'm not sure what, I guess, educational background,
Sure.
physical strength and stamina.
Right. You need to know what educational background, what physical strength and stamina makes for a good astronaut. What does a good astronaut look like? And so I would submit that in order to identify victims of human trafficking, in order to screen for them effectively, you have to know what they look like and specifically what the law looks like, right? What elements are required to be considered at the federal level and state level a victim of human trafficking. And so let's start with the federal prohibitions, all right? We'll start from the top down. And the TVPA refers to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. That was passed in the year 2000. It prescribes a definition for both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And we'll look at the definition of sex trafficking first. When a commercial sex act is induced by three things: force, or fraud, like deception, or coercion. All right? Now, and this is in which the person is induced to perform a commercial sex act induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or an act where the person was induced to perform that and they haven't yet reached the age of 18. So basically, this is the legislature saying, look, if you're forced to perform a commercial sex act, then you're a victim of human trafficking because it's not consensual. However, if you're a minor, we're not going to require a showing of force, fraud, or coercion because no minor can consent to a commercial sexual act. It's a physical and psychological impossibility, and so let's make it a legal impossibility. So that means, under the federal definition, that any minor engaged in a commercial sex act, prostitution, is by definition a victim of sex trafficking. And this is found in Chapter 22 of the U.S. Code. Now, Commercial Sex Act, any sex act on account of which anything of value is given to or received by a person, right? So there has to be some exchange of something of value for the sexual act to make it a commercial sexual act. So, for instance, the father in Miriam's scenario, who was sexually assaulting her when she lived in the house, yes, he was trafficking her, and I would submit to you he was making her a victim of labor trafficking. But in those moments when he was sexually assaulting her, there was no sex trafficking going on because there was nothing of value exchanged for a commercial sexual act. Does that distinction make sense? Okay. Instead, what I would submit was going on was labor trafficking. She was being trafficked for the labor she was providing for the family. Now, if the... Go ahead.
Excuse me. What about if he was threatening that he wouldn't feed her unless she performed those sex acts?
So the law still wouldn't really look at that as sex trafficking unless there's something of value being exchanged. So if the dad invited his guy friend to come over and say, hey, pay me to have sex with this girl who's here, then she would be a victim of sex trafficking. But so long as there's not that exchange of something of value, the law looks at it and says she's a victim of labor trafficking who's also being sexually assaulted during her captivity. Good afternoon, sir. How you doing? Okay, so this law says, if this is a result of force, fraud, or coercion, so we have to ask, well, what does coercion mean? And the law, unfortunately, defines that. It says threats of serious harm to or physical restraint against any person. Also, any scheme or plan intended to make the person think that if they don't do the thing you're asking them to do, that some serious harm will befall them. And finally, my favorite, coercion could be as simple as the abuse or threatened abuse of the legal process. So if you put these definitions together, what you get is if you compel someone to a commercial sexual act and you do it through the use of force, deception, or the abuse or threatened abuse of the legal process, then you have a trafficking scenario. And so simply threatening to do something that is illegal to someone who doesn't do this would be enough for it to rise to the level of sex trafficking. Now, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, the TVPA, also prohibits forced labor and what they call trafficking with respect to peonage, which is like debt bondage, slavery, or involuntary servitude. And so the definition that it provides for labor trafficking, and this is important, right? It's not just that a family might be keeping a girl in their house providing domestic service. It could be that they are recruiting her, or harboring her, or transporting her, or providing her, or obtaining this person for labor services. And now, why did I say that the moment she got on the plane wasn't a moment when she was trafficked because she was being recruited and transported then? Well, it's because at the moment she got on the plane, there was no force or fraud or coercion going on, right? She voluntarily got on the plane to work for this family providing domestic service. She thought she was going to get paid, like most people get paid for their work. But instead, once she got to the family's house in the suburban New York neighborhood, they used deception and coercion and abuse of the legal process to force her to stay in the house, to scare her that if she left the house, something bad would befall her, that if she called the police, nobody would listen to her or believe her, so that they could, as it says here, subject her to involuntary servitude, debt bondage, or slavery. Now, there's a couple phrases in there that we should unpack. What does involuntary servitude mean? Well, a condition of servitude induced by a scheme, plan, or pattern intended to make the person think that if they don't do this thing, some harm is going to befall them. Or again, we have the threatened abuse of the legal process. And what does the abuse of the legal process mean? I don't think this is the clearest definition in the world, but here you have it. The use or threatened use of a law or legal process in any manner or for any purpose that the law wasn't designed. So this is really broad. I think this really gives you a lot of creative possibilities if you want to bring a case on behalf of a victim of human trafficking to say, at some point, someone threatened to misuse a legal process in order to keep this person working. If you can allege that, then you have a prima facie case of human trafficking. This employer, this person threatened to abuse some legal process to coerce this person to continue working, and that person felt, as a result, like they couldn't leave. Now, debt bondage is similar, where a person owes a debt and their work, their sort of efforts are not being applied to, lower that debt. The debt just keeps growing bigger and bigger versus smaller and smaller, and where the length of that debt isn't limited and defined. Federally, that's debt bondage, which falls into the bucket of labor trafficking. Now, with respect to documents, there was an amendment to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act in 2013. It used to say no one can take your identity documents for any period of time. They amended that, and they said if you knowingly destroy or conceal or confiscate someone's identity documents for 48 hours or more, then you have committed trafficking, because they are not free to leave, right? Someone has your passport, someone has your driver's license, you are not free. You are held captive to that person who has your identity documents. So if you can allege that some employer took someone's identity documents and put them in the filing cabinet and kept the person from accessing it, you'd have a case of labor trafficking on your hands, I would submit.
What in case of voluntary?
What's that?
So, like oil rigs,
Mm-hmm.
everybody goes offshore, everybody gives their passport to the master.
Sure. If they voluntarily do it,
Yeah.
and it's the case that they can come back to the office at any time and say, I quit, I'd like my ID back, I'm leaving, and they get it back, no harm, no foul. It's when they go back to that office and say, I'd like to leave now, can I have my documents back? And the employer laughs at them and says, that's very funny, keep working. It happens every day in the United States. Now, let's talk about Pennsylvania's law against human trafficking. So you can know, if you want to bring a state case on behalf of a victim, how you're going to do it. Well, first, it's important to note that all the law in Pennsylvania related to human trafficking is inside the criminal code. So you got to go to Title 18, Chapter 3001, if you're going to find Pennsylvania's law on human trafficking. And of course, it's going to have the criminal penalties and the criminal charges, first one being sex trafficking. And it's not surprising, it's very similar to the federal definition. A sex act involving a performance for anything where anything of value is exchanged directly or indirectly. And if it's obtained from a minor, then you don't have to show force or fraud or coercion. But if it's from an adult, then you do have to show that the person somehow was forced or defrauded or deceived or coerced to do this commercial sex act. And then Pennsylvania similarly says with labor trafficking, again very similar, they say if you provide work or service of financial value that's induced or obtained by one of the following 12 means, then you've labor trafficked someone. And here are those, 8 means. Causing or threatening to cause serious harm to a person, physically restraining, kidnapping or attempting to kidnap, abusing or threatening to abuse the legal process, taking the person's personal property or real property as a means of coercion, engaging in unlawful conduct with respect to documents, extortion, or fraud. So if you sort of use any of those means to keep someone working, then Pennsylvania would say you have committed labor trafficking. And so fortunately, under this law that was only passed, and this is relatively new, in 2014, and so not many attorneys have used this, both as prosecutors, there haven't been very many cases prosecuted for sex and labor trafficking, and very few, I would say maybe none, civil cases that I'm aware of have kind of gone to completion, where someone has been sued for committing sex trafficking or labor trafficking. But if you were going to sue someone civilly for labor trafficking or sex trafficking your client, you would look to the criminal code and you would use the language there in your complaint. Now, what remedies are available for human trafficking victims? There's a few. First is the judge could order restitution at the end of a criminal case. So someone pleads guilty and the judge says, well, you employed this person for 3 years and you paid them for exactly 1 month. You owe them 2 years and 11 months worth of pay. Okay, so that could be one manner of a person getting their money back. The other could be a civil action, where you actually sue the employer, you sue the landscaping company, you sue the restaurant owner, you sue the mushroom house, you sue the local diner for trafficking and for money damages. saying you employed this worker, you took advantage of their vulnerability, you didn't pay them, or you so severely underpaid them that it was tantamount to not paying them, and you owe them, all those back wages. It's not just a contract claim where you're saying that you've coerced someone to keep working against their will. You've trafficked that person. And why is that significant? Well, if you've ever worked on a contract case, you know that you can't recover punitive damages for a contract case. You can't recover attorney's fees for a contract case, most of the time, unless it's written into the contract. But in a trafficking case, as we'll see in a few slides, you can recover things like punitive damages and attorney's fees, and some other damages that I'll talk about. Now, in a restitution order, if this is the end of a criminal case, you could either ask the judge to impose the value of the victim's time, or you could say the income that the defendant received as a result of the victim's services, or you could say the amount that the victim was promised. Whichever one of those three numbers is highest is what you can ask the judge to impose under Pennsylvania's new law. You can also ask the judge to order the return of property, the cost to replace that property, or the cost of any damage to that property. Now, I talked about civil actions. Here are the damages. If you sue the restaurant owner, or sue the landscaping company, and say you failed to pay this one employee or these 5 employees, and you coerce them to continue working, you get the actual damages, what they should have been paid. You get compensatory damages, which match the actual damages to sort of prevent them from doing this in the future. Punitive damages, to send a message to the community, this conduct is not tolerated. You can also get injunctive relief, like you have to start paying this person immediately, or you have to start providing housing for this person immediately, or you have to start giving food to this person immediately if maybe those things were deprived. Attorney's fees and costs, and my favorite, number 6, treble damages. Who knows what treble damages are? Right here.
You 3 times whatever it was.
You get 3 times whatever it was as the penalty. So Pennsylvania is saying we are not tolerating this anymore.
Insurance claims that bring punitive damages and treble damages under consumer protection law.
Sure.
How are they interfacing? Because I know judges, if there's treble damages, do not generally allow punitive damages in addition.
This law really hasn't been exercised yet, so I would say feel free to make new case law on it. But I think that's probably, that makes sense to me, that a judge wouldn't impose both punitive and treble damages. If it were me, I'd probably say, Your Honor, forget about the punitive damages. Let's just discuss the treble
Punitive
damages.
damages can go up to 15 times.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, you could really make, I suppose, either argument there. What you have to show for treble damages is that the acts were willful and malicious. And now in Pennsylvania, the statute of limitations for bringing a civil case is 5 years from the last act that constitutes the trafficking. So if you can say on the 3rd year of their employment with the restaurant, the employer was still saying, I will have you deported if you don't keep working for free, well, then you could allege that on that 3rd year was the sort of the last date for the purpose of the statute of limitations. All right, so just a little bit about kind of immigration law and the sort of status of kind of how it's enforced in our country. Department of Homeland Security is the cabinet level department that oversees immigration affairs. Underneath the Department of Homeland Security, you have Citizenship and Immigration Services, or CIS, and they're the sub-agency that grants benefits to immigrants if they're eligible. Next to CIS, you have ICE, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement. ICE basically enforces all the benefits that CIS gives out. And so if you got a temporary benefit from CIS, like a permission to stay here for a certain period of time, and then you exceed that period of time, ICE, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement, are the officers that will come and find you and deport you because you've exceeded the benefit that was afforded to you by CIS. ICE is also helped out by HSI, which is Homeland Security Investigations. Those two work hand in hand. And so, if you were an immigrant, like Miriam was, and you came here on a valid visa to do valid work, expecting to get paid for the hours that you put in, and it came to pass that you were trafficked by your employer. And let's say it came to pass that you overstayed your visa. Your visa was for a year, but your employer forced you to work for 3 years. Now you have an expired visa. The moment your visa expires, you are eligible for deportation. I heard a story just last week of someone who had an expired visa due to their employer's actions, and within 5 hours, ICE agents came and picked that person up and locked them up and put them in immigration detention, bound for the border. So if you find yourself in that position and you actually have been a victim of human trafficking, one of the things you can do is you can apply to ICE, sub-agency of DHS. You can say, I am a victim of human trafficking. Please give me continued presence here in the United States so that I can assist you with your investigation of the trafficker, right? So I can share with you everything I've seen and heard and help you prosecute that person. And so it's sort of this temporary status to remain in the United States to facilitate the investigation and prosecution of those responsible for the trafficking. The only people who can petition for this are a U.S. attorney, federal prosecutor, FBI, or ICE. And ICE has a quick turnaround of 45 days to approve this or disapprove this. Now, this doesn't last very long. And in many, 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 many cases, continued presence isn't granted by ICE. And those who are familiar with ICE know that ICE agents are not looking to give many immigrants sort of extended stays here. So the alternative to getting continued presence from ICE is to apply for a T visa. So a client walks into your office, you determine that individual has been trafficked, you decide you want to bring a civil case for that client to recover the back wages that they're owed, but their immigration status has expired. Or maybe they came here without documents in the first place and they never had an immigration status at all. If you learn that they were trafficked, you can help them apply for a T visa. It's a non-immigrant visa, but it strangely can help you become a permanent immigrant to the United States. 5,000 of these are available every year, and so far, only about 1,000 each year are being given out. And the reason for that is that people aren't applying for them as aggressively as they could be. So basically, to get a T visa, you show that you are a victim of human trafficking and that you're in the United States because of your trafficking situation. I came here expecting to do valid work on a visa, but when I got here, my employers tricked me, they deceived me, they forced me to continue working, and as a result, my visa expired. I am here right now without status on account of my traffickers. Now, you also have to comply with reasonable requests from law enforcement to investigate. And sometimes this looks like telling law enforcement, hey, I'm here, I'm happy to investigate, I'm happy to help with your investigation, and that will be enough. Sometimes the members of law enforcement actually ask you to come in for interviews and actually ask you to provide that information. But the legal standard is you must only be willing to help with the investigation. There's no requirement that there actually be an investigation or that you actually assist with it. You just have to be willing to. And if you're representing your client is willing to assist with the investigation, but you meet with a police officer who says, I'm not giving legal status to anybody. I'm not going to help someone stay here with a T visa. I'm not signing that. You can write an affidavit. You can include it with your T visa application saying, we tried to go to local law enforcement to get them to sign off on this, and they were unwilling to. But my client remains willing to assist with this investigation or any investigation that might occur. And you send that package off to Citizenship and Immigration Services at the Vermont Service Center up in Vermont. And if you've made a credible case of human trafficking, particularly if there's documents that you can show that back up your claim, and you'd include a detailed affidavit from your client, you may very well be fortunate enough to get your client a T visa. You might say, okay, great, but like who wants a temporary visa? Because then my client just has to leave once it's over. And what I would tell you is that a T visa can actually turn into citizenship. So, if the person is physically present in the US for at least 3 years, they've been of good moral character the whole time, and they can keep complying with requests from law enforcement to investigate, guess what? They can get a green card. From a green card, it's not difficult to get citizenship. So identifying someone who's been a victim of human trafficking, just the identification, can help that person eventually gain citizenship if they remain of good moral character and willing to assist the police in investigation of the person that enslaved them. It's a big deal. It can change their life, and they can bring over their kids. And if they're young, if they're under 18, they can bring over their parents. It could really change someone's life significantly. So if we're not careful with how we're looking for victims of trafficking, if we're not careful with the questions that we ask, we might miss the opportunity to end the enslavement that they're experiencing. We might miss the opportunity to bring a civil claim for money damages. We might miss the opportunity to report it to the police. In Kentucky, the criminal statute of limitations for a crime like this is 1 year. In Pennsylvania, it's only 2 years. If you don't get this reported to the police, they're going to say, sorry, we can't do anything about it. Fortunately, the civil statute of limitations is 5 years. But you want to be careful. You want to be able to identify those that you come across to see if they might be eligible for immigration benefits or civil remedies, or to go to the police with their story. And the immigration benefits that we talked about, continued presence or T visa.
Does your willingness have to be within the statute of limitations? So if it's been more than 2 years, can you still qualify for T visa if you're willing to?
Yeah, the T visa doesn't have a statute of limitations, fortunately. The 2 years is for bringing a criminal case, but if you're sort of outside that 2 years, you can still be willing. And there might be a federal investigation too. I would say that's always on the table. Now, where do we find human trafficking, right? We've talked a lot about this, we've looked at the law, but like, what are we talking about? I've mentioned landscaping companies, but what else? Massage parlors, nail salons, we talked about the example of domestic work, bars, strip clubs, cantinas, it's largely sex trafficking, traveling sales crews, restaurants, peddling and begging crews, agriculture and farms. That happens a lot because farms are so private, and oftentimes farmers make sure that no one comes on their property uninvited. They can do whatever they want with the immigrant workers that they bring onto their farm. Construction. A lot of industries that are like low wage, considered low skill, even if they're not low skill. You can tend to attract workers who are vulnerable, who either don't have an immigration status or their immigration status has expired, or they're coming over with a valid visa and they want to do work in the United States. And we're going to talk about some of those immigrant workers who take every step necessary to come over in a legal fashion and follow all the rules and work for employers that sometimes wind up trafficking them. So this also happens in hotels and in the hospitality industry, landscaping, commercial cleaning services. There was a really big case in Philadelphia involving individuals that were cleaning like big box stores after hours, and they were, because no one saw them, right? Because they were there when all the shoppers went home, they didn't interact with anyone other than their employer. And their employer sort of forced them to live in a particular kind of dilapidated place and use their documents against them by saying, we have your documents now. We can call ICE and have you deported if you don't keep working. And so they did. They kept going back to these big box stores night after night for fear of being deported. We see this in carnivals, we see this in forestry and logging, and recreational facilities. Now, what about in Pennsylvania? What's the status of human trafficking here? Well, you can see in 2017 there were over 200 human trafficking cases, and only about 12% of those were labor trafficking, which means the vast majority of cases being identified are sex trafficking cases. I think that it's worth mentioning that the way the statutes are written, any sort of work that's forced is labor trafficking. And so even if you have a sex trafficking case, I think there's an interesting legal argument that that is also a form of labor trafficking. And so sometimes when I talk about this, I emphasize or I refer to labor trafficking. That's because I think really anything and everything that could go wrong in this employment situation could fall under the bucket of labor trafficking. And you'll see the questionnaire that I prepared talks about labor trafficking for that reason. But I think that we're not paying close enough attention, right? If 88% of the cases we're seeing right now in Pennsylvania are sex trafficking, my question is are we really opening our eyes? And look at where it's happening. I mean, sure, around Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, that makes sense. But a little out here in Harrisburg, and look at this, central Pennsylvania, Northwest Pennsylvania, we have some like red hot spots. I'm not confident that's sex trafficking, happening out there. My guess is that that's probably where the 24 labor trafficking cases are happening, out in these sort of rural areas where employers can just have their way with their employees, and what are the employees going to do about it? Who are they going to make a report to? And this kind of tells you what industries in Pennsylvania this is actually happening in. So in Pennsylvania, it seems to be a similar number of cases of domestic work, sales crews, health and beauty services like nail salons, transportation and strip clubs. But then look over here on the right for sex trafficking. The overwhelming majority is in spas and like massage parlors, where sex trafficking is going on and being reported. And then residence-based commercial sex, so like a brothel. There was a dean of a southeastern Pennsylvania law school that went to a brothel out in Chester County on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Went there at noon. The dean of the law school, the dean. And he was caught and arrested. And he had to step down for obvious reasons. But that's what they mean when they talk about residence-based commercial sexual places, literally a house set up just to operate as a brothel. All right, so where do we focus our efforts? Oh yeah, please.
How are most of these cases being found? If you're out in those rural areas, how do you even help those families?
Yeah, it's a really good question. How are we finding these cases? So I think people who are aware of what human trafficking is reporting something when they see it. And so there's a national human trafficking hotline I can give you the number for, that you don't just have to sort of make a report when you know there's human trafficking. If you even suspect it, you can make a report. Because what they do is they collate data. And so if 10 people make a report all about the same nail salon that stays open until 2 in the morning, they might contact local law enforcement and say, hey, can you do a drive-by? Can you just see what's going on at 2 in the morning at that nail salon? Because most other nail salons on that neighborhood close at 7 p.m. So it can be really useful to make those reports to the National Human Trafficking Hotline so they can collate that data and send it to local law enforcement. They'll also send me information if you report a case related to labor trafficking or that you think that might be going on. But let me try to give you another answer to your question of how do people see it and find it. We worked substantially about 6 years ago on a bill in Pennsylvania that would require the posting of the National Human Trafficking Hotline in places like massage parlors and strip clubs and sort of cantinas and late night bars. And there was a lot of pushback. A lot of those business owners said, we're not posting anything about trafficking in my business. There would never be trafficking here. Absolutely never. I'm sure of it. So we're definitely not posting that. But advocates kept pushing, kept working, kept getting more sort of legislators on board, and ultimately got that bill passed in Pennsylvania. So now there's about 100 different types of places in the state where that phone number has to be posted so that someone might see it and might call. People are going so far as to make new soap wrappers with the number for the trafficking hotline that says if you need help, call this number, and distribute them for free to hotels. So hotels start putting them in hotel rooms where a lot of prostitution tends to happen. And there's, I met some advocates last week when I went to a labor trafficking conference in Kentucky. There's individuals who try to go onto farms as much as they can. There's actually a law in Pennsylvania that allows for a limited purpose going on to farms to sort of check on the welfare of the workers, and like I said, it's sort of limited and there's very specific ways that has to be executed. But some people have used that as a way of better understanding and better seeing what the living situation of workers is. But I think the thrust of what I hope you guys kind of get out of this is that when we ask the right questions in conversations with people or in interviews with a client who walks in the door, we might be able to better say, oh, you might be in a situation that you feel like you can't get out of. Or in the past, you might have been coerced to stay in that situation. Let's help you get a T visa. Let's help you make a report to the police. Let's bring a civil case for you to get all the back wages that you're in. So if we're going to focus our efforts, where do we focus them? And you might say, well, of course, undocumented workers because they're so vulnerable to exploitation. But look at this number. 71% of labor trafficking victims in one particular study had entered the US on a lawful visa, right? They did everything possible to come here legally. They were here legally, and yet 71% of them were still trafficked. So you might say, okay, fine, let's forget about the undocumented workers. Let's focus on the documented workers who came here legally. Well, there's another report out of San Diego State University called Looking for a Hidden Population that found that 31% of undocumented Spanish-speaking migrant workers had experienced labor trafficking. So I think the point of this slide is that both undocumented workers and documented workers from other countries are both experiencing labor trafficking. And the most significant categories of immigrants that experience labor trafficking belong to these sort of lettered categories below, which probably won't mean much to anyone but our immigration practitioner in the back, but I'll tell you what they are. They are diplomats and support staff for diplomats who love to bring over domestic help from their home country. They are H-2A workers and H-2B workers, and just in a minute we're going to do a deep dive into H-2A and H-2B workers. They're J-1 workers, which are the kids from Eastern Europe that you see at the boardwalk and amusement parks. Those are J-1 workers. This is actually super interesting. Their purpose in coming to the United States, according to the Fulbright Act, is a cultural exchange. They are here to learn about democracy in its best form. What winds up often happening is that they spend 60 hours a week working at Dorney Park, and they don't get a chance to tour the country. But the goal is a cultural exchange so that they get to sort of see all that America has to offer. So that program has been wildly abused, I'll say. And you can learn more about that at polaris.org if you want to sort of know more about those visa categories. Like I said, we're going to do a deep dive into H-2A and H-2B workers because it's super relevant to how people are taken advantage of and how people are exploited. So the most common visas or documentation that immigrants come to the United States with actually tie them to a single employer. So, sorry, what's your name?
Mel.
Mel. Have you ever worked in an industry other than legal services?
Yes,
What?
I was in the office products business.
What is it?
Office products.
Office products. Okay, great. So let's say that you wanted to go to Germany and you got a visa to live there for 2 years. And while in Germany, you wanted to work. You might apply for a work visa in Germany, and you can bet that on the application you're going to have to say, this is the employer I'm going to work for, this is the amount of hours I'm going to work, this is how much money I'm going to get. Now, when you're in Germany and you start working for that employer selling office supplies, you might not like the terms of the employment. So what you might do is apply to the consulate there in Germany and switch the terms of your visa to go work for a different employer. Not so in these United States. In America, when you come to the United States, particularly as a low-skilled worker with an H-2B and H-2A visa, and you said that you were going to work for a landscaper or a construction company or a restaurant for a certain period of time, you're tied to them. It literally says in your passport, because your visa is inside your passport, it says on there the name of your employer, Green Acres Landscaping. That's it. You're tied to them. The moment you stop working for Green Acres Landscaping, what's your immigration status? You're undocumented. You do not have legal documents saying that you're in this country validly, because the only immigration document giving you a breath to breathe says that you work for Green Acres. So if you are not being paid and want to go to a different employer that pays you, well, now you're undocumented. If you're being sexually abused in the workplace and want to work for a different employer, too bad, you're tied to Green Acres. If you've asked your employer time and time again, please stop paying me $45 a week and pay me the $450 a week you owe me, what do they say? They say, why would I? You have to work for me. You have no choice. So that's where it gets really difficult when someone comes to the United States as an unskilled worker without a lot of education, without knowing the recourses available to them, and they find themselves working for an employer who doesn't really care. And so here are the two visa categories I told you we do a deep dive in, H-2A and H-2B. These are sort of what's called the unskilled categories for guest workers. And you can see the H-2A category, 90% are from Mexico, and the H-2B slightly lesser from Mexico. You get more from Central America. But look at the categories. H-2A, I'm calling it A for agriculture. Agriculture, farms, orchards, tobacco. These are the people leaving largely Mexico, coming to the United States to pick our fruit and pick our cotton and our tobacco, and they come here for generally 9 months to a year. H-2B workers, a little different. They almost all come for just 9 months. And they come generally from March to November. And from March to November, they might do beekeeping, they might do construction, many of them do landscaping, they might work in restaurants, they might work at amusement parks, they might work in housekeeping. Whatever it is, it's low skill, it's low wage, and it's work that generally Americans don't want to do. Now, there's a few interesting facts about H-2A and H-2B visa holders. If you're an H-2A visa holder, and let's remind ourselves, it's agriculture, farms, orchards, tobacco, your employer has to provide you with food and shelter and transportation. So if you came here to work on an apple orchard, your employer actually has to provide you housing at the apple orchard or off-site, and then drive you to the apple orchard every day. And they have to provide you 3 square meals a day. Also, if something goes wrong with your employer and you need free legal services, and you find a nonprofit law firm that provides free legal services, and if that nonprofit law firm gets federal funding from Congress, no problem. You can be represented if you're an H-2B visa holder. But watch what happens. Watch what happens when we go to H-2B. H-2B, the employer does not provide food or clothing or shelter or transportation. You probably work for a restaurant, work for a landscaping company, you live wherever. You get there however it costs you, however much money it costs you. And if something goes wrong with your employer when you're an H-2B visa holder and you need legal services and you find that nonprofit that gets federal money from Congress, guess what? There's an exception carved out in the statute that says you're not eligible for free legal services from nonprofits accepting money from Congress. And you might say, how in the hell is that possible? Why is that the case? And I would tell you that the agricultural lobby and the lobbies of industries affected and that hire H-2B workers have been very strong and very powerful in the history of our country. And when they were passing the Farm Worker Act that would create these visa categories for individuals to come, they said, sure, we'll allow the farm workers to go and get free legal services, but not so the construction and landscape workers. No, we can't have that. So there's this fascinating report here called Close to Slavery, Guest Worker Programs in the United States. They'll send chills down your spine. It's really good. So here we have it, guest workers. That's what the visa category is called, H-2A, H-2B. It's these unskilled seasonal workers. They can't leave for another job. There's no requirement for a job description or a contract. You'd think that maybe there would be surprise inspections, right? ICE would show up or Department of Labor would show up, make sure they're being treated fairly, make sure they're being paid appropriately. No, it doesn't happen. They can be deported if they quit, and they're afraid. They're afraid of being blacklisted. They're afraid that if they leave or if they're fired, that their employer will tell immigration next year, make sure you don't bring that person from Mexico. Make sure you don't bring that woman from Guatemala. She's a quitter. And there are way more applicants than visas given, so they're not going to hire someone who walked off the job last year. So you might say, okay, now how can we find these individuals? What should we look for? What are sort of trends that are common? And so I pulled out some common threads from labor trafficking cases, according to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. And those include like the industries where this is most common, in agriculture, landscaping, hospitality, restaurants, and domestic work. Some of the common troubles that people report are mounting debt, right, where it keeps getting higher and higher. fear of deportation, where they're being emotionally and physically abused, threats of harm to their families. I represented one worker, and he said, yeah, one time my employer brought me into the office, and he asked me to sit at the computer with him, and he brought up a photo of my family's house in Mexico. It was on Google Street View. And he reminded me that he knows where my family lives, and then told me to go keep working. Right? Sometimes it can just be a threat of knowledge, a threat of harm to a family member. Sometimes it's isolation. Sometimes it's bringing people to that completely remote part of Pennsylvania, or that completely remote part of the city of Philadelphia, where other people aren't looking and paying attention, where someone can be taken advantage of. Now, as far as with common threads of employment, this often happens where there's recruitment fees, where the employer says, oh sure, I'll help you come over from Guatemala, I'll even wire you $5,000, but I need $3,000 in interest, so you'll start your employment $8,000 in debt. Guess how long it takes that person to work off their $8,000 debt?
5 years.
Maybe 5 years? Absolutely. It's not even remotely legal. You might have someone sign a contract. Say, okay, let's agree that you're going to make $2.50 an hour. Here's a contract in English. I know that you only speak Mixteco, which is a language from Guatemala. Well, I don't have to provide it for you in your language. Law doesn't say I have to. So these problems are common. 50% of trafficked workers reported paying a recruitment fee. 47% took out a loan before they traveled. 52% weren't shown contracts. And then 1 in 10 actually showed up for a job that didn't exist. Like Miriam, right, coming from Egypt. She thought she was going to be working for families, sort of getting paid legitimately, being treated well. And in fact, they just wanted really a slave in their house. So I think questions not worth asking, just because we're running short on time, I'll sort of give this to you, but I think it would be things like, are you a victim of labor trafficking? Or have you been exploited? People don't often respond well to those questions. But instead, I think if we can ask them questions that get at the underlying conduct, it really helps. And I'm providing you with a bunch of questions, both in these slides and in the handout, that I think are really useful to ask. It might not be the best practice to run through all 60 of them in your first interview, but you can drop some of them into conversation. And if you gain comfort and familiarity with the person you're speaking with, maybe you can run through 10 at a time or 20 at a time. But I would say, are you doing work that's different from what you were promised? That was certainly true in Miriam's case. Are you told to do work that you're not trained to do, right? Are you being forced to work in an unsafe environment? Could there be a penalty if you miss hours from work or take a break? We see that a lot. How do you travel to your current place of employment, right? If your employer is bringing you everywhere, do they have control over where you sleep, over how you travel, over where you work? It's literally everything. It certainly makes you want to ask more questions. How much money did it cost you to travel from your home country to here? I have a handout I'm going to tell you how to download that has all these questions in it if you don't want to write them all down. But do you take any loans that cover your travel expenses? Does your employer take deductions from your pay? I've heard of employers who say, I'll pay you $7.50 an hour, but because of your housing and your meals and the transportation, I have to deduct $8.50 an hour. So at the end of each day, you'll owe me $65. They don't care, just do it. Is there a minimum amount of time you have to stay at your workplace, right? So this person might say, well, I incurred $8,000 debt coming here, I'll be free in 5 years, right? It's a useful question to ask someone like, is there a date that you're counting down to? Have you been promised back pay that you're owed if you stick around? I have a case right now. These guys were working, they were underpaid each week. At first it was 80% of what they were owed, then it was 50%, then it was 30% of what they were owed, then it was 0% of what they were owed. And so the employer said, hey, keep working. I swear, I swear, I just come back, keep working, and I'll pay you, it'll be good. I know I owe you a few $1,000s a piece, but just keep working and I'll give it to you. And instead they came and found me. So, has your employer ever hit you? Have they ever hit another worker? Right? It doesn't have to be a threat to you. If you believe your workplace will turn violent if you turn against your employer, you might be being coerced to continue working. Is violence tolerated? Has your supervisor ever attempted to hit you or threatened to hurt you? Do they know where your family lives? Have they commented about that? Have they ever communicated with your family, right? If your employer is like called back to your client's family back in their home country, that's weird. Should make you ask a lot more questions. Are you afraid for someone's safety? Does your employer have your passport? Do they have any other of your documents? Is it in a locked filing cabinet? Have they ever tried calling the police on you? Have they even threatened to call the police, right? They don't have to actually pick up the phone and call ICE or call the police. They could merely say, oh, you're asking for your paycheck? Do you want me to call ICE? Yeah, I didn't think so. All right, keep working. Right? That would be enough to force someone into this lifestyle of slavery. I want to give you an example just before we end here of an actual case that was filed in January of this year out in Washington State. And this involved workers who were harvesting blueberries for a really big company. If you've ever seen this, these guys sell blueberries in the grocery store, Sardinand Farms. They had 600 of these H-2A workers picking the blueberries. They basically said, hey, look, we need you to work in Oregon. If you go there, we'll extend your visas. Don't worry about us. Give us your passports. So the workers went to Oregon, did the work. Guess what? They never got their passports back. Now they're undocumented. They said, hey, can we ever pay? And the employer was like, you're undocumented. I'll be deported in a moment. In fact, we're near the border here in Washington State. I'm friends with Customs Border Patrol officers. I will literally call them this afternoon if you ask for your paycheck one more time. So they protested. They said, we're not standing for this. We're going to stop working. And it turned violent. It turned fatal. Someone went to the hospital and died. The workers believed they would suffer serious harm unless they submitted to the employer's demand. They were threatened to send home. They were threatened to be deported. They couldn't eat while they were working the fields. They were filmed with the employer's cell phone. Anyone who questioned the company's practices were fired. They weren't allowed to take sick days. And there was a fence surrounding the whole place. So this complaint was filed in federal court this January and basically alleged that these workers had to meet certain production standards or they were fired or they were threatened with deportation and that they had to continue providing labor under these threats of deportation and that there was retaliation for asserting their rights and saying pay us. And so what are the damages sought in this civil case? Well, from this huge company, and actually there's like 3 defendant companies, because there's like the farm labor contractor that provided these guys and the person who's housing them and the blueberry company. So they're saying, look, all profits gained from the work of these 600 people, they're lost and unpaid wages, punitive damages for recklessly violating their rights, and then the amounts deducted from their paychecks for meals, because you had to provide the meals, you can't also deduct for that, and then attorney's fees and costs. So it's really my hope that this case will be successful, it will send a message to other employers, and that the workers will actually get the money that they're owed for the work that they performed. And I also hope that as advocates and as attorneys, these cases will help you sort of develop more questions worth asking. I think each of these questions that you see on your slide are questions that stem from and arise out of the conduct just described in that case. And so every new case we hear about should help us ask more questions and say, oh yeah, that was an issue in that one case. I'm going to ask this person in front of me if maybe that happened to them. I'm going to ask this person if maybe they ever experienced this because of that case that I heard about. So I hope that leaving here today, you'd be motivated and encouraged to identify more cases of trafficking in the news, to read about them, see what shape they take. You can email me if you want to read more complaints from cases about this, or if you want to read reports generated by the government or nonprofits about this issue. And if you want all my questions that I would ask someone during an interview, I have 60 of them. I put it in a 3-page document. You can download it at that website, stoplabortrafficking.com. I hope it could be useful to you the next time you're in a meeting with a client who potentially might have experienced something along these lines in their past, or share it with other individuals you might know that work at a place like Community Legal Services that serves the poor, serves the indigent, serves people who are just in a vulnerable situation. Because I think more than anything else, this is about preying on people's weaknesses and vulnerabilities. So I hope that was useful to you guys, and thanks so much for staying an extra couple minutes.
Okay.